Hi, this is Bastiaan, and this is a game I played against an engine a few weeks ago, using the London system, and the engine was using the King's Indian. So play starts with d4, and black plays g6. And at this point, white has a lot of choices. He can play e4 and play classically, c4 if he's more familiar with the Queen's Gambit. He can develop knights and evade events, even play symmetrically with pawn g3, or he can play, as was played in this game, bishop to a4, the London system. And the London is a good choice against King's Indian type of formations. d5 and e3. So I'm locking out the bishop and committing myself to the London system. Knight to f6 and h3. And h3 is designed to provide a square for the bishop to fall back to on h2. Also, it prevents development of the knight to g4. Black continues with d6, knight f3, and knight to h5, and this forces the bishop back to h2. But in this situation, the bishop still has pressure on the diagonal, and this knight has a limited mobility and will have to fall back probably to f6. But keep in mind that black hasn't developed his bishop yet on g7, and this square can be used for the knight to redevelop in some cases. Knight c6 and bishop b5, and I said in another video, I like playing bishop to b5 in the London system, because if bishop takes knight and pawn recaptures, black will be left with double pawns, which would provide an excellent target for the bishop on h2. Bishop d7 to prevent pawn doubling, and c4, entering a type of Queen's Gambit formation, with the bishop typically protecting the pawn from f1, now protecting the pawn from b5. Bishop to e7, so now we're seeing black's getting ready to castle, and he's not developing to the g7 square, and possibly the knight will go to g7 instead to redevelop, which is an interesting idea. Knight c3, bishop b4, creating a pin, so I castle. Take, take, a6, take, take. Now I'm left with double pawns, but either pawn takes pawn or pawn takes pawn, so that can be resolved without problems. So pawn takes and pawn takes. Knight to e5. Again trying to double pawns by capturing the bishop. So bishop to b5 to prevent that. Rook e1, f6 to kick back the knight. And here we're seeing our first tactic. Instead of undeveloping the knight, which is fine, instead I immediately counterattack with a4. And the reason why is that this forces black to undevelop bishop, so I can recapture it, because there's no longer any safe square for the bishop on the board. And black cannot play pawn takes knight, because if he does, I can play bishop takes pawn with an attack on the rook. So rook moves and take, take, more exchanges, and this pawn is hanging. Bishop takes pawn, and at the end black has lost 2 pawns. He has doubled isolated pawns on the b file, and black's in a lot of trouble at this moment. So a4 can be played without problems to chase back the bishop. And black is forced to retreat with bishop to d7, which is probably the best square, so he doesn't have to double pawns. Take, take. Queen to b3. And now black is going to have to castle queenside in order to protect the pawn. But I've got a lot of pressure on the half open file. So rooks are coming in. Rook to c1, rook to b1 could have been played as well. It's going to be played next move. And black redevelops his knight, which is placed awkwardly, using the g7 square. Rook b1, queen c6, in order to protect b7 square. So now the black's queen is committed to this defense on b7. c4 to open up the c-file, and black cannot recapture because if pawn takes, then we get rook takes. With a lot of pressure on b and c files, queen has to retreat, still has to protect b7. Then rook takes, check, protected by the London bishop. King b8, rook takes pawn, check, and this looks absolutely terrible for black. So black doesn't recapture, knight to e6, pawn takes pawn. Now I'm forking both pieces. Queen recaptures, still covering the b7 square. Now another nice move, queen to b6, and of course black cannot recapture because of the pin with the rook. And queen b6 gives mating threats. There are too many attackers on c7, but the real strategy is a bit more sneakier. The queen will develop behind enemy lines. So black first needs to cover the threat on c7 and is forced to play rook to d7 to cover the c7 pawn. Now queen to a7, and I'm threatening of course queen a8 with an attack on the rook on h8. But there's no longer a threat on c7, so black is forced to repeat moves and has to play rook to d8 to provide escape for the king and to connect both rooks. And at this point, bishop sacrifice, bishop takes on the pawn on c7. And keep in mind that this sacrifice could have been played earlier, but it's in almost all cases it's winning for white, so it's played now. Bishop takes pawn. So black is forced to recapture. So I'm down a minor piece. And now it's time to create a battery on the c-file with tempo rook c5. So queen goes to e4. And rook c5. And it's over for black. If queen e7 and queen e8, check. Rook takes, check. Take, check, check, and so forth. Losing for black. If instead of queen e7 we get rook to d7, we get queen e8, check, and mate. Doesn't work. Black but king d7 was played to get out of the pin. This of course loses the knight. Rook takes knight check. King moves to e8. Now the queen can come in with queen takes pawn, but more elegant is to free the queen with the rook. Rook takes pawn, and this provides an opening on c7. a5, rook c7. There's no way to stop the mate. Desperation exchange, queen takes rook. h5, there are no good moves left. Check, check, check. Queen a7, checkmate. So that was my game against the King's Indian using the London system. A nice illustration on how to use the London bishop with a sacrifice on the diagonal. And thanks for watching, and have a great evening.